That's a magnificent song. I think one of, actually probably any frustration that we experience can probably be narrowed down to the fact that we anticipated something being one way and it turned out to be another. And this song emphasizes the fact that God's law is not like that. His expectations of us and his personality does not change. Let's see, how do I want to start this? I hope I know by now, don't I? So let me introduce this way. Before I was married, I thought I was a nice guy. And then I got married and my wife very gently taught me otherwise. But I still thought I was a smart guy, and then I had children. And learned that that's not true either. So this lesson has to do with children a little bit, but I want to make it clear that this is not supposed to be a parenting sermon. This is just comparing some things we already know under a particular theme. So I've got verses and stuff up there, but I might not spend a lot of time delving into them because they're already things that you're very familiar with. In fact, in one instance, some of it's from Ephesians 3, so we've been studying this morning. So as we go through this thing in the context of children and fathers, I want to realize that this is not me attempting to share my knowledge of children because I've learned I can just give that up. Everyone in here has either raised children to adulthood or not, and I'm one of the people that hasn't, so this is not me making that effort whatsoever. But I've been observing my children, and I'm learning that they're growing quickly. That happens quickly. So this sermon is quick. Observe your children before they can observe you, because I want to look more specifically at the relationship between father and child, particularly as it relates to our relationship with the spiritual father. He refers to us as his children. What is he doing when he does that? That is the point. The relationship that we have with Christ is described, with God is described in many ways. The king and his people. I could have verses up there for it, but you know it's true. And I want to, not take too long here. The king and his people, masters and slaves, we see that. The groom and the bride. We are familiar with that illustration. And all of these things, to spend some time looking at them and what that relationship describes would be healthy. The Savior and the saved, obviously. The judge and the defendant. The shepherd and the sheep. All of these are different relationships used to describe the relationship we have with God. The father and children. This is what I'd like to look at. We are referred to as God's children, or God is referred to as our father, somewhere around this, and this is extremely rough. Okay, but I did do some digging, and this is what I came up with, roughly 1,600 times. And this must be a pretty good illustration if he can rely on it that many times for us to understand what the relationship is supposed to look like. So, in the Old Testament, children of Israel. Obviously, we're familiar with that. Ooh, this thing just kind of shocked me. It must be my thumb there. And in the New Testament, we're referred to as adopted heirs, as Brian was reading, sons of God, children of God, that kind of thing. So, we see it applied slightly differently in the Old and New Testament, but the parallel is supposed to be the same, what the relationship with God is. So, why this description? Now, back in May of 2016, Brittany Wyatt, who some of us know, put up a post that was mimicking almost exactly some things I had been thinking about now having children and feeling like my head was cut off, and trying to find some meaning in what I was learning here, right? So this is what she said. There are some excellent reasons why we can understand that children are a blessing. So, she probably was just dealing with a mess or whatever, and was trying to remind herself, why am I happy to have children? Why am I happy to have children? And two of the points that she made, they teach us about the parent-child relationship and the attitude we are to have toward God. And this is exactly what I'm talking about now. I've been mulling over this stuff before I saw this post. After this post, I thought, there's enough material here to work with. They teach us about the childishness in ourselves and help us learn sacrifice and maturity. Those principles, as we start engaging in them with our children, we can turn around and go, oh, this is what God was doing for me. This is why he uses this term to describe the relationship with him, father and child. So if the description is so emphasized throughout Scripture, what can we learn about our relationship with the spiritual father as we observe our relationship with our physical children? And again, I won't be bringing up anything here that's new or different. It's stuff that we already know, just spending a little more time looking at it from a surface perspective to understand when we say this, there's a lot of detail behind these words. So, first point, children don't see the big picture. Marcy's already going. Okay, I'm on the right track. Thank you, Marcy. Children don't see the big picture, but the father does, right? Children see hardship as an opportunity to complain. The father arranges hardship to build character and learn lessons. In fact, it's not really often a hardship at all. A trip to Home Depot was Dad's favorite hardship when I was little. So if you'll humor me for a moment, the second most insightful work ever made after the Bible in terms of understanding the human condition would be Calvin and Hobbes. So I want to look at this for a moment, and don't bother reading the whole thing. Calvin, it's dark, it's time to go to bed. I don't want to. Nothing spoils fun like finding out it builds character. Right? That's the first thing that, look, I was having fun and you spoiled it for me. Now the Father is saying here, look, there's a reason why you need to develop this understanding of it's time to come in and obey, all this stuff. He blah, 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 and that's what the child is here. And I was having fun, you ruined it for me because you were trying to help me out. And he does it again. What's this disgusting slimy about my... So, look, fun, now eating, right? Notice the context of these things. Try this thing, you'll love it. This is my dad always looking out for me. They will build character. It will build character if you do this thing. I don't want to. But it will build your character. What is the Father trying to do here? He's trying to develop his son in the direction he needs to go. Work. We had fun. We had food. We had work. And now he's working. So in every aspect of Calvin's life, his dad is trying to stink it up for him. Why can't we get a snowblower? I must be the only family in the world that shovels the driveway by hand. I'm freezing. It builds character. Keep at it. Calvin doesn't understand his dad's purpose is not just to make him miserable. Okay, that he's trying to develop something in him here. But Calvin doesn't see the big picture, and his father does. It's freezing in here. Why can't we pick it? So not in any specific activity. I'm just living, and you're going to ruin it for me. Consuming less fuel is better for the environment, saves money. Oh, and being cold builds character. I knew it. He expects it now. He realizes that this is what he gets from his father. Okay, you're trying to do this thing for me, and in my perspective, you just want to make my life stink. And then finally, honey, have you seen my glasses? I can't find them anywhere. I haven't seen them. Calvin comes up dressed up as his dad. Calvin, go do something you hate. Being miserable builds character. This is him quoting his father. If he's going to impersonate his father, this is what he says. You make me miserable. That's what you do. And you do it to build my character. But he doesn't really understand what that means. The big picture is not there. And as a society, we recognize this. We laugh at this because we realize this is the relationship. But let's look at that relationship. The father sees the big picture. The child does not. Children see hardship as an opportunity to complain. That's all it is to them. Okay? I'm going through this thing and I can't see outside the realm of the thing. I only know how I think it's affecting me, and they're even wrong about that. It's not affecting them the way they think it is. It's building that character. The Father arranges hardship to build character and learn lessons. Look back at Exodus 9 for a moment. Exodus 9:16, this is during the plagues, back and forth between Pharaoh and Moses. That's the sort of thing that's going on here. And mind you, the Israelites have been enslaved here for generations now, dealing with this. The new Pharaoh was raised up that did not recognize God and did not know the family of Israel in the same sense that the old Pharaohs had. He put them under their thumb. He raised their burdens. He raised their burdens more because they were so productive, or reproductive, I guess, both. That he needed to oppress them. And the people are crying out at this point, why do I have to deal with this? There's no big picture here. My life stinks, and it's your fault, Father. We don't see them explicitly state that, almost. But anyway, there's a offhanded remark in this chapter that discusses why this is going on at all. Look at verse 16 of chapter 9. Where'd mine go? So this is Moses speaking God's thoughts to Pharaoh. But indeed, for this reason, I have allowed you, Pharaoh, to remain, in order to show you my power, in order to proclaim my name through all the earth. Still you exalt yourself against my people by not letting them go. God's big picture was, I need to be exalted, I need to show the people who I am. Not just my people, which he will do in this process, but also the whole world. So, people, all these years, God, why are you making me suffer in this way? Not seeing the big picture. The big picture is God needs to be glorified, and this is how he's going to do that. Esther 4:14, we don't have to turn there. Mordecai says to Esther, perhaps you were raised to this place for this very moment. Okay, again, they're in oppression, they're suffering. Esther personally is suffering exquisitely. Mordecai, too, that separation would not be comfortable, right? There's many things here that they were having to deal with. And Mordecai's thought was, even without direct inspiration, like Moses had an understanding of, there's a plan bigger than our understanding taking place here. And you need to be aware of that. Now, in these instances, in Esther's instance, Esther didn't complain. I'm sure there was fear associated with that. But we don't get the sense that she's griping about it. But there is discomfort, and you have to wonder why when you're in that situation. Turn over to Acts 8. This is right after Saul is holding the coats of the people who have stoned Stephen to death. And on that day, what happened? Great persecution. Calvin is just made miserable by his father. Right? This is that moment going on here. Okay, our spiritual father just must want us to be miserable because we're persecuted, is the weak point that you could have here in this process. If you're a Christian at this location at this time, this would be what you're asking yourself. We're being persecuted. On that day, great persecution began against the church in Jerusalem, and they were all scattered throughout the regions of Judea and Samaria except the apostles. Now, how horrible would that feel to a new Christian being persecuted and then separated from all the other Christians and sent out into a land that they weren't familiar with because they've been living here? Okay, that's a pretty uncomfortable, unfortunate, build character kind of situation. And God had an additional purpose for that spreading, as we know. The gospel became implanted in other areas because the Christians were driven out of that location, right? So, he had this plan, but from the perspective of a person within it, do you see that? Do you see that? And then Genesis 45, let's go back to this one really quickly as well. This should be Joseph. He's sold into slavery. He's in Potiphar's house. He's kicked out of there. He's put in prison. He eventually becomes a servant to Pharaoh. The famine occurs. The brothers come down. The brothers eventually recognize him after he reveals himself. After he reveals himself in verse 5 of chapter 45, "Now do not be grieved or angry with yourselves because you sold me here, for God sent me before you to preserve your life." Okay? How many years did Jacob have, or did Joseph have an opportunity to wonder what the big picture was? And the suffering in between, I hope I never see the half or the tenth of what he dealt with there. But eventually he reached a point. I'm sure he questioned. That doesn't mean he sinned in that process, but it crosses your mind. What is the plan? What is the plan? God has a plan. We are his children. It will work out. Joseph was blessed to recognize that. Very, very wonderful. So we need to be doing the same thing. The Father recognizes the big picture. As adult children, we must recognize God's intent for us and learn and build character through trials. For example, this is why this came up, honey, the other day. Our friends, the Works, they tried for how long to move to Brazil? In fact, I remember there was some issues with their paperwork. And so Joe ended up driving from St. Louis to Cincinnati twice or 3 times in like 3 days because the office kept on messing it up or whatever. And you know, well, we're moving. We've sold our house. We've left the congregation, but we're still local, so we're moving to a different congregation for 6 months, and you know, the upheaval for the children, and there's just this mess, and now we're not going to Brazil. Oh, great! What do we do instead? Well, who here is glad they're in New York? You know, and I posted on Miriam's Facebook page the other day. You know, this is one of those things that makes me think, boy, God had a plan when you didn't end up in Brazil. Just an example. For me, recently switching jobs, I'm not sure I know what the plan is yet. I know that I feel like I suffered extensively in this upheaval with the jobs, you know, but there's going to be something that is going to work out from that, and I just have to trust that to be true. And I'm not inclined to do that naturally. It takes effort and time to think about that. Other things could happen to you, horrible things. We know people whose house burned down. I can actually think of two different families where this happened. One in Texas, and the wife there discussing all the advantages that came from that experience and what happened with them, you know, whether it was as little as the house we've got now we like better, or the fact that they met people, you know, that were influenced by you know, a Christian attitude towards this tragedy, or whatever might be going on there. Health problems. Lee has told stories, I believe it's Lee, about a friend who was in the hospital and received comments from the staff, maybe it wasn't Lee, I don't remember, about, you people are different. You know, somebody's been diagnosed with cancer. Why are you behaving like everything's going to turn out okay? Well, there was an advantage there because somebody was severely impacted by the behavior they saw exhibited in Christians when suffering in this way. Children don't see the big picture, but the Father does. Children dangerously overestimate their own power or capability. I'm not talking massive power, but their capability, their ability to accomplish something. They think, oh, I've got it covered, and they don't. They don't. They underestimate their Father's power at the same time. And we're going to get into Isaiah here in just a moment. So Anastasia, a number of weeks ago, this is the point at which I realized, I got to talk about this. She's getting out of the van. She's doing it on her own. And she looks, I'm going to help her out as I usually do, and she says to me angrily, I don't want help, and then help! Because she was halfway down and got her belt buckle stuck on something or whatever was going on, and she's like dangling there, and she wasn't graceful about it in terms of requesting that help from me once she changed her mind. Like, oh, okay, child. You know, you're going to be grumpy, you want to do it yourself. Fine, do it yourself. And then instantly, the sentence was not over, and she was demanding my help. Not a please, I made a mistake or whatever. It was just, you're there and you're going to help me and I know you're going to help me and so help me, help. It needs to be that way. And in that instant I thought, you know what? I do this all the time. I do this all the time. When we confidently reject God's help and self-inflicted disaster strikes, we instantly return to him demanding help. 1 Corinthians 10:12, let he who stand take heed lest he fall, right? And then back in Isaiah 40, let's look at this again. We were looking at it on Thursday, and this point was made a little bit. 40:27. Now we're discussing this. Why do you say, O Jacob, and assert, O Israel, my way is hidden from the Lord, and justice due me escapes the notice of God? Do you not know, have you not heard, the everlasting God, the Lord, creator of the ends of the earth, does not become weary or tired, and his understanding is inscrutable. He gives strength to the weary, and to him who lacks might, he increases in power. Now, do we remember this conversation about the fact that the people of Israel should know why God hadn't helped them out yet? Their disobedience had put them in this place. Okay? And so they were disobedient, and they were ugly to him about these things that they were supposed to be doing. They got their well-expected and just deserts because God had warned them that this would be the case. And then when they find themselves in this situation, they are accusing God of not helping them again. Not oh, I repent, please help me now. And we do see some of that. But in this instance, I'm in trouble, where are you? See, this is why I didn't trust you to begin with, because you're not here to help me. That's the attitude. This is not a healthy attitude. 1 Kings 18. One of the sermons I was working on before I switched to this was about the prophet on Mount Carmel with the prophets of Baal. This is a fantastic story because Gary did the sermon on the donkey. Jonathan did the sermon on David after that, and I thought, well, the story that scored big with me when I was little was the prophets of Baal, and so that was the next one I was working on. Anyway, 1 Kings 18, verse 39. We remember what happens here. The prophets of Baal make a mess out of themselves, and then the prophet comes along, and Elijah comes along and does everything he needs to make it clear that no earthly power could accomplish what these people are about to see. Okay? And remember, he asks them, how long are you going to waver between two opinions? So the people around here are going, a little bit of God, maybe not. Maybe a little bit of Baal. They're bouncing back and forth in this way over this issue. But then the fire comes down and burns up everything. The water, the stones, the sacrifice, just everything. It's gone. It's ashes. And instantly, verse 39, when all the people saw it, mind you, these are the people that a minute ago were going, instantly when the people saw it, they fell on their faces and they said, the Lord, he is God, the Lord, he is God. Okay. Now here they are, having gone from a situation where they're absolutely rejecting him, but pretending that, how long will you waver? To recognizing that this is the case. Bowing, worshiping. God's power was there all along. They just weren't willing to accept that fact. Unfortunately, until they saw it. Now with Anastasia, if I were to be angry, more on this later, if I was to be angry about the fact, she's hanging there off the little knob or whatever that latches the door, right? Help, help, help. And in my power, there's a lot of things that I could do to her to make the point that you were just really ugly to me. But that's not my role. That's not the appropriate point at which to try to make that clear. So, these people, watching this fire come down and consume the rocks and the water and everything else, have to recognize the fact that this could have been coming down on them at any time during their rejection of him. At any time. And it did not. But this is the way children behave. This is the way children behave. May we rely on him before we make these poor choices. Because he has the power to do things and he's showing restraint. He is always showing restraint. Children enjoy the benefit of a parent's sacrifice. Oh boy. But they fail to comprehend the scope of the sacrifice. And this is going to get into Ephesians a little bit like we were discussing this morning. Note that I don't say they can't comprehend, although, to be fair, there's a point at which they can't, but they fail to. Okay, I have the capacity to understand Christ's sacrifice, but I don't always completely do that, or I forget about it in my behavior, that kind of thing. So, care to discuss the sacrifice of raising children, or, because I fail to comprehend my wife's sacrifice. Just towards me, she was trying to explain to me how to run the washer again this morning, because I never do it. I never do it. And, I magically, if you take your dirty clothes and put that in that one spot in the bathroom, the next day they're magically clean again. And if she would just do that, it'd work for her too. I don't know what she, But see, I fail to grasp the fact that she's the one that's doing that work on my behalf, that she has that sacrifice to make. So, I just put that down here to remind it applies to me and those around us. But here to discuss the sacrifice of raising children, there's sacrifice involved there. You give up a lot. I'm beginning to learn very slowly. I'm definitely behind the curve when it comes to realizing just how much you need to intend or expect to give away in this way. But how does that compare to the sacrifice of saving souls? Okay. So, when we look at Ephesians 3, let's turn back there. This is what we were discussing this morning. And to be fair, Dad really did make the point. I just wanted to look at it a little bit differently. 3:16, He would grant you according to the riches of His glory to be strengthened with power through His Spirit in the inner man. So that Christ, to what purpose? So that Christ may dwell in your hearts through faith, and that you, being rooted and grounded in love, may be able, and there's our word, to comprehend with all the saints what is the breadth and the length and the height and the depth, and to know the love of Christ which surpasses knowledge. So, we are making that effort to comprehend, but the Bible admits that it surpasses our knowledge. It is more than what we can fully grasp. To be filled up with the fullness of God. And then now to Him who is able to do far more abundantly beyond all that we ask, or, and George says, even think, according to the power that works within us. To Him be the glory in the church and in Christ Jesus to all generations forever and ever. Amen. So, this massive sacrifice, and we spend time dwelling on it and meditating on it. Hopefully on Sunday, hopefully other times too. We live daily under the reality that because of our sin, God could send down fire and blow us apart based upon what we have done, but He has shown restraint and mercy and love. And how do we comprehend that? We do our best and we are learning, and the time we spend together helps us get there. But the sacrifice and the full scope of that sacrifice is really an effort for us to fully grasp. We fail to grasp that. We certainly fail to grasp it when our behavior suggests that we don't care. But that sacrifice is huge. And children are that way. We see that. We make a sacrifice for them. The moment a child is crying, Janice is there. And they are used to that. And they appreciate that because they stop crying. But do they really understand? Mom had to stop doing this. Mom's mind was working on this, and now it's working on something else. She had just gotten moved on to the, and you're interrupting again. None of that's there. They accept that benefit and they're grateful for that in their own way, but they do not fully comprehend what's going on here. And as children, we struggle to comprehend the full extent of the sacrifice that God the Father has made. Job 37 doesn't specifically talk about the sacrifice, but it does specifically talk about our inability to comprehend Him as an entity, as a person, that we cannot answer Him. Verse 1, At this also my heart trembles and leaps from its place. Listen closely to the thunder of His voice, and to the rumbling that comes from His mouth. Under the whole heaven He is let loose, and His lightning is to the ends of the earth. After a voice roars, He thunders with a majestic voice, and He does not restrain the lightning when His voice is heard. God thunders with His voice wondrously, doing great things which we cannot comprehend. Okay? Not only can we... spiritual salvation is a complicated... It's a simple process. He's made it simple for us. But it is something so far outside of our grasp. We can't see it in that sense. It's not a tangible thing that we can taste and touch in that way. And we fail to comprehend it. Let's try something more simple. Explain to me how a tree is made. Okay? Or how thunder and lightning works. Okay, I understand it in a scientific sense, but create that again for me. Replicate that. These are far more basic than the benefit that we have of Christ's sacrifice in the other sense. And God is capable of these things, and we have no comprehension. We fail to grasp His power and His ability to do these things. Consider the apostles of the crucifixion, the resurrection, and the ascension. It's happening before their eyes. And you see it with Peter later on in Cornelius' house, where it finally dawns on him. What's going on here? The time that took in between, that's us. That's us. As His children, these things are difficult for us. As children, these are difficult for us. Real children have difficulty understanding the sacrifice that has been made and understanding the scope and the nature and the character of what has taken place here. And it takes effort and work to get there. We train our children to understand the sacrifice that I know I'm going to train mine to understand how inconvenient they have been for me. That shouldn't be the attitude. But you know what I'm saying? Like you want them to realize, whoa, there was effort placed on this. Children view obedience as punishment. You're going to make me be obedient? I already don't like it, and so you're out to get me. Kind of like I was talking with Calvin before. but the father views it as protection. So some examples of this. I say to my child, stop. What are they supposed to stop? Well, here's some examples of things that I specifically had to say to them. Running across the road. Okay, stop running across the road. And they think, oh, you're just restricting, I'm a free spirit, Dad. Anastasia hasn't said that, but that's it. Why are you hindering my ability to live the way I want to live? Is what's going on here. So I say, stop running across the road. Stop sticking the fork in the outlet. Stop shoving your brother into the dryer. Okay? Stop crawling down the stairs head first. Stop playing with the toilet brush. And I want to emphasize this one for a minute because I'm going to bring it up again later. This happens more than once. Just hang on to that thought for a minute because the Bible has an example that is similar to this. Very, very similar to this. So we do all these things to protect our children. They don't see it as protection. They see it as some sort of hindrance or burden or punishment. But we view it as protection. So the children of God are supposed to be careful. In what ways are we supposed to be careful? Look over at Genesis 2. Mind you, direct relationship with God the Father Adam and Eve had. Verse 16, the Lord God commanded the man, saying, from any tree of the garden you may eat freely, but from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil you shall not eat, for in that day that you eat from that tree, you will surely die. Now, as we know the rest of the story goes, you don't actually die. Okay? Whose perspective? I mean, Eve's picture was too small to understand this. And, oh, it looks good. And I mean, you reach a point where, God is just wanting to be me. He's hindering me from having this thing that I want. And that's the scope of that understanding. But there's more to it than that. God recognizes that this is for their protection. Okay? You may not do this because it is bad for you. You may not stick your fork in the outlet because it will hurt you. Don't do this. So, when a limitation is placed on the physical child, they do not yet recognize, but will eventually, hopefully, recognize that that was done for my protection. As is the same with us. Okay? This is something that is off limits to you, and it is for your protection. You don't have to understand it for you to be protected from this thing as long as you trust me and be obedient. Look at Deuteronomy 23. This is getting back to the toilet brush. I don't mean to be crass, I won't be crass, but I want to look at this for a second because this is interesting. Deuteronomy 23, 12 through 14, of course, this is the telling of the law here again. Well, that's not right at all. 23, sorry, I was in 13. 23, 12 through 14. You shall have a place outside the camp, and you will go there. This is in amidst all the boring laws that you read about. And you shall have a spade among your tools, and it shall be that when you sit down outside, you shall dig with it, and you shall turn to cover up your excrement. Since the Lord your God walks in the midst of your camp to deliver you and defeat your enemies before you, therefore your camp must be holy, and he must not see any indecent thing among you, or he will turn away from you. Now, I want to make a point that this verse does not make. It would be unhealthy and therefore dangerous for the Israelites to have their bathroom in the middle of the camp. Okay, and to be treading, this would be unsanitary, and disease would fester, bad things would happen. God could prevent that if he chose to in his own way, but this is something we know already. So, in the basic, most logical sense, we realize this. But this isn't really what the verse says. The verse says this is a matter of illustrating holiness to them. Okay? And so Elliot playing with the toilet brush again is another opportunity to remind him that, look, there are nasty things out there that you want to avoid. God wants the holy things, not the nasty things. And I honestly believe that when you look at this verse, this is yet another illustration of the fact that God is using their bathroom habits to explain sin to them. Look, this is something that you don't want to be anywhere near. Get it out of the camp. Get rid of it. Bury it. Keep it a long way away. Okay, and you impose or transpose that concept to sin, and you have taught them that this ugly thing that God will have nothing to do with is dangerous to you. Do as he says and leave it alone. Get rid of it. Remove it. 1 Peter 2. 1 Peter 2, 1 through 3. Therefore, putting aside all malice and all deceit, this is right, and hypocrisy and envy and slander, Like newborn babies long for the pure milk of the word, so that by it you may grow in respect to salvation, as you have tasted the kindness of the Lord. I think I just want to point out from this that the illustration to newborn babies is put in the context of a contrast with the malice and deceit and hypocrisy and the envy and slander and all those things with a limited perspective and a small scope. As a human being makes it go, well, these things can be kind of fun. It's kind of fun to pick on other people, if that's what slander is going to be, right? You have an opportunity, I want that other thing, and so I'm going to indulge in my desire to envy. Okay? This is what we are inclined to do as children who've grown just enough to watch our parents behave in unkind or ungodly ways. Look at 1 Corinthians 5 as well. Actually, don't. 1 Corinthians 5, this is the conversation about what to do when there's sin in the church. Put it out. Okay? Deuteronomy 23. If there is a nasty, ugly, unholy thing, don't let it be in your midst. Get rid of it. Is this comfortable? Is it easy? Is it nice? Does it, what's the word I'm looking for? There used to be this hip term for like cramping your style or something like that. Does it cramp our style? Yes, it does. We don't like it. Okay? But it is for our protection. And this is what this verse in particular mentions. Yes, we're doing it for so that we can save his soul. And yes, so that his heart will be burdened and on fire and all this stuff. But we do it so that the church may be preserved. It is for our protection that we suffer this thing. When God demands obedience, he's not intending to make our lives worse. He is intending to make them better. I mentioned to Lee last Thursday, why is it that when we find ourselves suffering from our self-inflicted wounds, we throw out the solution instead of what caused the problem? Right? As we were looking at in Isaiah, the people are sitting there and they have rejected God at one point. Okay, because they're suffering now. Well, they were suffering. They weren't suffering. They rejected God. They started suffering. They continued to reject God. Now they're wondering why they're suffering. Well, you threw out the thing that could save you. Why did you do that? God is there to protect us, and his intention is for make our lives better. That doesn't mean we won't be persecuted per the other things I'm discussing, but he's trying to save us. At times, children might be difficult to live with. I've got two examples of this. One I've experienced personally, one I have not. Actually, I have, but I've been on the wrong end. At times, children might be difficult to love, and this is probably when they need love the most. And I mean real direction, discipline, training, reproof kind of love. At least in my first example. Cute anger. Janice and I really struggle with this because when Elliot is disobedient, he is undeniably adorable. It's horrible. And, so Janice sits there, Elliot, you're in such big trouble, because what are you going to do? So the loving thing to do is to discipline him. But she doesn't want to do that. I don't want to do that, but at that moment where he is rebellion, he needs it more than any other time. He needs it more than any time. And this is before, I don't even have it up there. I don't have it up there. So my other example was teenagers. I remember being a teenager and being impossible to live with, as I probably still am. But the point was, that's the point where I needed the most direction and guidance, or whatever. And even then, I wasn't cute. I was just downright, there was nothing to like. Nothing at all. Okay, but when Janice and I are experiencing this is the point at which we really have to recognize the fact that we have to get over that and do the right thing. Yeah, patient and to have a patient and just response to disobedience. So back in Ephesians, we were studying, and the reason these Ephesians verses come up is because as we've been studying Ephesians, so every week I try to read through Ephesians the whole way. Because it's a short book, that's what I've been doing to prepare for class. So Ephesians 2, 1 through 4. You were dead in your trespasses and sins, in which you formerly walked according to the course of this world, according to the prince of the power of the air, of the spirit that is now working in the sons of disobedience. Among them we too were all formerly living in the lust of our flesh, indulging in the desire of the flesh and of the mind, and were by nature children of wrath, even as the rest. So that's our condition. We are children of wrath. This is not an attractive child. A wrathful child is not an attractive child. An indulgent, lusting, desiring the flesh, disobedient child is not the attractive child. But God, so there's our condition, but God being rich in mercy, not because you were cute, because you were attractive, because he just was a big softie, but God being rich in mercy because of his great love with which he loved us, even when we were dead, a dead child. Made us alive together with Christ, for by grace you have been saved. So, when we were at our ugliest, God had it in him to do this for us. That is at the point at which we needed it the most. Note that cause, that his love is what allowed this, not of our own merit of work, not even the fact that we were pleasant to be around. Children of wrath. He did this anyway. So, now notice also here, the Father is never the unreasonable one. Okay? He sets his expectations early while we still have a chance to not disobey him. We go through this process of disobedience, and then we demand something of him that we have no right to ask for. And he eventually, as we learn our lesson, restores us in that process. But we can never accuse him of being the unreasonable one here. It is always us. We are always the problem. And, assuming that I'm a good parent, and that is an enormous assumption, okay, I will not be the unreasonable one with my children. It will always be them, but I have to live with that. I have to address that on their terms. I need to do what I need to do with them, because the point is to get them in a right relationship with me as reflected through God. So I cannot be the one that fails them in that way. Notice also that his purpose for us is more than not dirty, rather pure. And this affects our ability. This is illustrated in how we raise our children in terms of the standards that we set for them. Okay, I picture a child on the edge of the street in the mud playing with the ash and the grit and the cigarette butts and all the stuff that's down there in the dirt. Okay, now would we, if we loved them, pull them out of that, set them on the curb, and walk on? No, we do not. We take them inside, we bathe them, we put them to bed, we spank them soundly. We do whatever it is that needs to be done for them in that way. And the same way with God, how grateful as a child of his do I need to recognize that I was playing with the toilet brush over and over and over again. And he didn't just take the toilet brush away from me, he adopted me as his heir. This is way further. And so when I see that God has set that example for me, okay, man, he didn't just kind of, give me a crutch. He really found the things that I needed for me to thrive. This is what I need to do for my children. One of the ways that I do this is not by monitoring or gauging their success by what the world assumes is a good child, because a child on the curb is way better than the one in the ditch, in the gutter, right? But recognize that his standard, God's standard, is the one I'm supposed to be pointing for, because I can always find a child who I dislike more than mine for their behavior. Always can. And it's really easy for Lee and Marcy to find children because we sit right in front of them, right? But they shouldn't be comparing their children to mine. They should be comparing their children to God's expectation for children or for people in general. And if I'm wrong about that, I apologize. Just in terms of, because now I'm saying I believe this to be the case, and I hope I'm correct. So, should fathers compare their children's behavior to the world or to the Word? And this point follows very closely on the heels of the next one. Children want perfect parents. I didn't ask to be born. Right? I don't have the hair to flip. But I mean, this attitude exists by the time they're older. Hopefully not, but it can, right? And children can recognize flaws in their parents. They can do that, and it's frightening. And this is why the title of my sermon, observe your children before they get a chance to observe you, because they're observing 100% of the time. They're always watching. Children want perfect parents, and children don't have perfect parents. So, we discipline in error. And I can think of one time where I consciously, so far, have disciplined Anastasia in error. I completely misassessed the situation. Elliot got a spanking. She got a spanking. She didn't deserve it. Janice pointed that out to me. If I had assessed it correctly, I would have been correct, but I was wrong. I had my facts in error. I acted quickly so the lesson could be learned well, and I was wrong. And I apologized to my daughter and explained to her that I had made a mistake and that I am not perfect. And hopefully there was a lesson to be learned for both of us there as well. So, I can discipline in error. I am not a perfect parent. And if you want to consider an example of when God disciplines in error, help me out, guys. God is perfect. He's a perfect parent, and he's a perfect example of a parent. He is a perfect parent. He's a perfect example of a parent, and he can illustrate his example of perfect parenthood perfectly. He can do those things. So what have I realized in this? From the previous point, to raise children to God's standards, perhaps we should focus, I say we, I mean me, perhaps I should focus more on God's standard for me rather than my standard for them. After all, I have the perfect example to follow, and they don't. I hope this makes sense. Here I am with a perfect example of how I should behave. Here they are without a perfect example of how they should behave. And I'm the one that's going to tell them what to do. That's my role. I understand within another context that is my role. But I have to realize the fact that the only thing that's preventing them from seeing the perfect example is me. I'm the one in the way of that. And I don't know exactly how this looks in terms of action, but I need to recognize the fact that I'm the one who needs to be learning and learning and learning and learning and learning. And if I have focused on that, they are observing me all the time. They can pick that up. So, what is the application to adult Christian children of God? Be so thankful that you have a perfect parent. Whether you're a parent yourself or not, be so thankful that you have the perfect example that you can go to and understand how you are supposed to behave. And if he's given us that, what excuse do we have? Because Anastasia always has an excuse for her behavior. And most of the time, they're legitimate. They're legitimate because she has seen that in me. But if I was paying more attention to my behavior, and my children are watching, they will pick that up. Last point I have to make, children receive an inheritance. Right? When the father dies, most of the time, stuff is passed on. That's where that belonging trail goes, and it's been that way since the beginning. It's always been that way. But it often comes with conditions. Okay? And when a son does something the father doesn't like, he can cut him out of the will pretty quick. It happens. So the last verse, and then we'll be done, is Revelation 21. This is kind of an interesting verse to go to as an invitation. Revelation 21, verse 7. He who overcomes will inherit these things. He's discussing the new heaven and the new earth. He who overcomes will inherit these things, and I will be his God, and he will be my son. That is the relationship described again. The inheritance is mentioned there, and the condition is there. If you overcome these things, this is my will for you. This is what you will receive because I am your father now. I've given you an example. You can overcome these things. If you trust me, we can do this. You will receive this inheritance, but it does come with conditions. This has not been incredibly deep. The point was to make it clear, again, for us that when we say, we are children of the Father, well, what does that entail? What does that say about our behavior? What does that say about God's personality? What does that say about his gift to us? So that is all this has been, and I hope it has been edifying. We want to be children of God. We want to help other people become children of God. We all need help. None of us are perfect. So as we consider what God has done for us, the enormous sacrifice that has gone into this, let's be grateful for our inheritance. If we are not grateful, we could have fire raining down on our head, but he shows restraint because he loves us. Just want to turn it off so the battery doesn't die. And if we are not a child of God or have been living in sin, we're in a situation where the inheritance has been taken away because we have failed to meet the conditions. So if any of these things apply to you, I would strongly ask you to consider discussing this with somebody here, even if it's not as we sing our song, but let's go ahead and stand as we sing a song of invitation. Consider these things, please.